My name is Laird Klingler. I'm a librarian with the Cornish Historical Society. The date is December 1st, 2016, and we're at the home of Cheston and Nancy Newbold. Nancy could not be here this morning. She is very active in volunteer work in the community, and she had to take a person to the hospital. But we will talk as we go on about Nancy's volunteer activities here. Well, Cheston is here, and so Cheston, could we just start as a point of reference? Where and when were you born?
August 24th, 1939, and actually I was born in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I know that your family has had extensive contact with the Cornish colony, Cornish members. Could we start, let's start with the tea tray. I guess it begins there, doesn't it?
Yes. My mother's aunt, my mother's family came from a small town just north of Charleston, South Carolina, and were rice. They raised rice, or whatever, farmed rice, and as a result, they were wiped out by the Civil War, and the children that came after had to make their own way. And one of them, who was my mother's aunt, started something called the tea tray down in Aiken, where you go and have tea in the afternoon.
In South Carolina.
Yes, tea and sandwiches and so forth. And of course, in those days, Aiken was quite a place for people from New York and Philadelphia to go down in winter, and continued to be for a long time. And apparently, you could even spend a night. I think there was a opportunity for that sort of thing. And it was successful. And apparently, it's successful enough so that she followed some of the people when they came up here in the summer, and she had a tea tray up here. It's down on, the building's still there. There's a photograph of it behind you. It's down on Route 12A, just beyond the Slade Hill Drive, I think, or Slade Hill Road. I'm not sure which one. The house is still there. So she had that. My mother and her mother used to come up in the summertime.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
How did she happen to come here to Cornish then?
That part of it I've never heard, except that she, I think, knew some of the people from Aiken who also came up here or knew about it. And she was an entrepreneur. She was making her way in the world. She had started this organization, business, and I think she probably saw this as an opportunity. Exactly why here, I don't know. I'm sure it was the attraction of the colony, though. And one went on here in the summertime.
Do you know about when she would have come here? I did read that it was sold in 1922.
She finished then, yes.
Yeah.
Probably, she was here while Woodrow Wilson was the president.
Oh yes, we want to hear about
I think she was here. She must have been here before the war. I would think. I actually don't even know that.
No.
You're asking some good questions. The answers to which I wish I had. So my mother and her mother came up in the summertime, and they would stay for a period of a fairly long period of time. And I think perhaps my mother, as she got older, might stay by herself with her aunt. Because she got to know a lot of the children, a lot of the people and their children. I know she knew St. Gaudens's children
Parish.
Yes, thank you. Parish's children.
Any stories about Wilson that you?
Yes, I know that my aunt was here doing with the tea tray at the time, because we have a letter from him to her thanking her for a tea that she had. I guess somebody had arranged to have at the tea tray one of the summers. I don't remember the date, but we have that letter from him to her and saying thank you. It was very nice.
Did she have any recollections of him personally?
I never knew her. My mother, no. My mother would not have. She would have been pretty young at the time. And my grandmother, I don't remember her talking about that very much. I think it was a difficult time for her as well. As a result of losing everything in the Civil War. So she didn't talk about that much. That's about all I can say about Roosevelt. I mean, he was here. He was at Harlackenden House for a couple of summers,
yes,
and
yes. He apparently, he had his office over in Windsor.
yeah.
And then he would stop sometimes at the tea tray, coming home.
Yes, I'm
Yes.
sure.
Yes,
I'm
yes,
sure.
Yeah. Well, tell us about some of the other, Cornish colony people that would go to the tea tray, or people that you knew.
Well, the people
family
that I
knew.
knew, and the tea tray was long gone by the time I
Yes, yes.
knew anything. But well, I
Your mother must have had memories of.
oh yes, she did. She
Yeah.
did. She knew a lot. As I said, she knew a lot of the children of these people, and I think she knew Parrish, but well, clearly she didn't know St. Gaudens. I didn't know them. The only one I knew was J.D. Salinger, who I'm not sure he knew me, but well, he did know me because he was in town still when I was a selectman. But anyway, my biggest memory of him is when we used to go to Windsor on Sundays and play softball at the Coxes, at the Everettses. You know about those two families over
Yes.
there. We would play softball here at the Platts, or we'd play over there at their field. And one particular game, it was very serious. Cornish had to win. We wanted to beat those guys from Windsor. One particular game, we were ahead, I think, by 1 run or something like that. And he was the umpire. Salinger was the umpire.
Salinger was the umpire.
Yeah.
Oh.
And he lost track of the score. And we ended up losing by 1 run. But he was great with Nancy, particularly with Nancy. We were raising a granddaughter here, and we had a box at the Windsor post office, as he did. And they would run into each other over there, and he was always very, very good with her, talking to her for a minute, and talking to Grace, our granddaughter. He would spend a minute talking to her as well. And then I love this story. When she was the librarian, which she was for a few years here in Cornish, somebody from the Boston Herald, I think, or one of the 2 Boston papers, came in and wanted to know where he was, where he lived. Can you give me directions? And she gave him a bit of a runaround, and then finally he said, well, he sort of said, I think you're giving me a runaround. And she said, well, actually I am. We don't tell people where he lives. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much what my relationship with him was. If we saw each other, we would nod, I think. That was about it. Not very close at all.
Now, you said you knew some of the children of St. Gaudens, right?
My mother did. I didn't.
I see. Yeah.
I have to tell you that when we came here in the summer, when I was a kid, we would come in early June and leave in early September, and we pretty much stuck here. We didn't go a lot of places. We stayed here. We worked on the place. My brothers and I. We worked on the place. We worked out in the woods. We had a 1936 Ford dump truck, and we used to have a game called "Let's see where we can get it stuck today." Literally out in the woods. If we could get it stuck, we'd have a red letter day and have a lot of fun doing that and unsticking it, of course. So when we left here, we would go maybe to the Reynolds, which was a farm over where Mark Humphel lives. And we would sometimes help him with his corn or his hay and that sort of thing. And the Fitches, maybe, I'm not sure that we did much farming with them, but we knew them. So we didn't go out too much. My folks did when they were here.
Can we go back to
sure.
when now, your mother would have known the area from being at the tea tray.
Absolutely.
And then she married. Could you go back to the time when your parents purchased this property, this home?
Sure. My father had never been here. And when they got married, they came up here. They took a trip. My dad was an oarsman at Princeton, and even as a graduate, well, he went back to Princeton and coached crew for a few years, but even as a graduate in business, and he still rowed. So they went on a trip, and it was partly, I'll take you there so you can see that, but you're going to have to go a few places where I want to row. And one of the places he wanted to row was Sunapee, Lake Sunapee. So they came here and they spent part of their time here, and I think he fell in love with the place, as my mother had, and he thought it would be nice to, if he could do it, to have a place up here. So he bought this place. He bought, the exact numbers I don't know, but he bought it in 3 different stages. The last stage was 2 acres, and the one before that was about 50 acres, and probably the first one then was about 100.
And this was a farm then?
This was a farm. It had been part of the Slade estate. The Bulkley's house down below was their summer house, the big house, and this was the farm for the Slade estate.
We have some pictures that later we're going to incorporate into the film to show what the farm was like. Now,
when we bought this, when my dad bought this place, Mrs. Bulkley's mother, Mrs. Morris, bought the house that the Bulkleys are in now. Mrs. Bulkley is in now. So then, and that was, I think it was 33. My folks were married in 32, and I think he was able to pull things together in the next year.
This was always a summer residence.
Yes. Yep.
Now you told me an interesting story one time about the road coming in from Dingleton Hill. The road comes up to your house, but at one time it did go down to 12A.
Yes, it did, and I think until about 72, there was a road across the fields down through the woods here down to the Bulkley's driveway, and then down and out, and that was considered a town road. But I've never gotten to the bottom of this. I know I have some information from town reports that it was thrown up at the end of the barn down here in the 30s. When my parents were here, and I've not seen it the other way, that it was thrown up, but it was thrown up from here to there. I mean, this part of the whole road was thrown up from Dingleton Hill Road down through. I had a long talk with Mrs. Bulkley once about all this when I was a selectman, and she said she didn't believe it ever was a town road. Or if it was so long ago that it had, I think she just said she didn't believe it was a town road, if I remember correctly. And she had a map that seemed to enforce that. But we let the town use the road. In the old days, all they had to plow Slade Hill Drive was a big crawler with a plow on it, and we let them come down what we used to call then the back drive, which is now our only drive, and come down through here, and then they'd push the snow going all the way down the hill. And I think they did it for a little while after that with some of their trucks, but I'm not sure about that. So there was a road here, yes.
There is a public road going up to the Bulkley.
It goes up to the top of the first hill.
And that's where this road would have come.
It came. If you go into the Bulkleys, by the time you get almost up to the house, there are 2 stone pillars, and if you look to the left, there's a road that goes up there. There are trees all over it now. It's blocked now. It's not been used for years.
Now you would have come here, when you were young, in the summer times more. And you mentioned about a baseball game in Windsor. We always like to ask people recollections of Windsor past compared to present.
To today?
Yes.
Well, first of all, it was a lot busier then. There were a lot more stores. One of the places I remember fondly was the drugstore, which is on the corner, in the center of town, on the corner that's open, where they have a piece of art, and they usually have a Christmas tree in there, right across from the bank. That was a drugstore, and Harry Harris kept the drugstore, and you went in, and it was an old-fashioned one with a counter in it, where you could get some of the world's greatest milkshakes. And my mother and I, when my mother would take me over there, and she and Harry Harris were very friendly, and he always made her a malted milkshake, and he made me pretty much whatever I asked for. which was great. And then across the street, where and I'm trying to fit it in. I think it's where the statue of the soldier is. There was a greengrocer. There was a movie theater. In that, it had to be in that blank space there, and part of it may have been where the bank is now. And keep on going next to the post office. There was a gas station, which there was for quite a while. Just a few years ago, it went away. But the guy that ran that gas station when I was a younger man and came up here with my kids, our kids, he was who you asked where to go fishing in the river. Glenn Bates. And Glenn Bates always knew where the fish were biting. I'm trying to remember what was across the street where Rite Aid is now. There was an automobile dealership in there, I think. The one that moved out to the edge of town a few years ago. It's all gone now. And the other thing I remember were the trees, big beautiful trees. And I'd like to tell you they were elms, but I wouldn't swear to that.
Where I mean, along the street?
Along the street, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Really? Yeah.
And some of those photographs, I think, have pictures of the elms after the hurricane.
Yeah.
That I don't remember, the hurricane, but you asked me where I was born. So I was born in Philadelphia, but I honestly think I was conceived in this house.
Well, let's go back a little now in time.
Wait, let me tell you why I said
okay.
that.
All right.
My parents were here for the hurricane, and it took quite a while to get out. I'd like to say it was 4 or 5 days.
1938?
1938. I think they were here for, it didn't take them a month to get out of here, but it took them a month or more to get organized and get things going around here. I mean, I've seen some pictures of the woods, and they were flattened. A lot of them were just flattened. Dad had at least one crew of men in here sawing wood. Anyway, they were here, and I figured it out one year, counting backwards from my birthday. I think I was conceived in Cornish.
In this house?
Yes,
All right.
in the bedroom that I sleep in now.
Well, not born, but conceived.
Conceived.
Okay.
According to the rules, that still makes me a flatlander.
Okay. Well, let's, before we get too far advanced in your younger years, you said in the beginning, we always like to ask people memories of World War II, and you do have some memories of that.
Connected to Cornish, I remember sitting on the lawn out here, BJ Day, and watching fireworks over Windsor.
Oh.
They had a firework. Well, I say it was VJ Day. It was sometime, and the celebration was for victory in Japan. It was around that time. As far as other memories of the war, they're not associated with here, but I do remember the radio playing and announcing Roosevelt's death or his funeral. No, it was his funeral, because I remember the drums in the background. And I remember at some point, my dad was in the Marine Corps. He joined up. Well, actually joined before the war, but he joined up, and it's either when he went away, he went to Bougainville, he was on Bougainville and Guadalcanal, and it's either when he went away or after he came back, being on my parents' bed with my brothers and my sister and my dad and my mom and all bouncing around. So I suspect it was after he came back, because we were happy he was home. And those are mostly the memories I have.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can come up with anything exactly else. Sometimes you have these things in your head and you think, well, and I talk to my brothers and I say, oh, you remember? No, that never happened. That kind of thing. So that's about it.
Well, let's proceed now with you growing up. You in Philadelphia?
Yes, and here.
Where in Philadelphia, man?
We were in a little town called Jenkintown, which is about 30 miles outside of
and that's where you
Center
grew
City.
up.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Talk about growing up, and then talk about meeting Nancy. How did you meet Nancy?
I was madly in love with Nancy's roommate.
Really?
But by the time that she became Nancy's roommate, we were
Was this
friends.
in college?
Yes, Nancy's college.
Where in
roommate.
college?
Oh dear, you'll have to splice it in when you ask Nancy. I can't
Okay.
remember. It was a school in New Jersey. It may come to me. But I had gone up to see, in a friendly fashion, to see this girl. And met Nancy and was struck, and I think she was struck because she said yes when I asked her to go out. So
Oh.
it went from there.
I
It
see.
went from there.
I see. And then when did you marry?
We got married in 1961.
61. And did you start to raise your family then in Philadelphia?
No, I was still in college. So we started to raise our family in Baltimore. I went to Johns Hopkins.
Oh, Johns Hopkins.
And I had 1 year left when we got married, and just about by the time I got out, our first daughter, Elise, was born. And at the time, I was in the Marine Corps Reserves in an officer training program. But they discovered that I had a bad heart. Interestingly enough, about 7 years ago, I had my aortic valve replaced, and that's what my bad heart was. But it seemed to be sort of, it disappeared to some, or I don't know how to say it, but I obviously the point being that it was that way from birth. It was a birth defect.
Now, so then you started your family,
Right.
And then where did you work?
Well,
when you were growing up?
I taught. And my first job was at Rumsey Hall School. It's a junior boarding school in Washington Depot, Connecticut, which is, if I recall, northwest Connecticut. And I taught there for a year, and then went to Philadelphia and taught in a couple of day schools, private day schools, K through 12, until 1980, when we moved here.
Did Nancy work, or did she raise the children? Or
She raised the children, and as they got older, she began to work. She worked in a preschool down there for 3 or 4 years before we finally moved up here, and then she worked here in the kindergarten while it was still a private kindergarten. When it became the public school kindergarten, she didn't have a certificate,
I see.
and actually, I ran into the same problem up here, although in Pennsylvania, if you taught X number of years, you were certified. And when we moved up here, I was told that wouldn't cut the mustard. So I went through a program in Vermont where I became certified and then taught in Walpole for a year. And they told me I couldn't come back because I hadn't taught for 2 years in Vermont.
Yeah.
And I just finally got so disgusted. In the meantime, I had taken a year off and gotten a master's degree, and I just got disgusted with the whole thing, and I did what everybody else does and started selling real estate.
Could you tell us the children? How many children you
3.
have? 3 children.
We have 2 daughters and a son. And oldest daughter lives in Burlington, and the next daughter lives in Saranac Lake, New York. She's married and has 2 kids. Oldest daughter has 2 children. And then our son lives next door, and he's married and they have 2 kids.
Now, when you were living and working in the Philadelphia area and around, I assume you came up here to visit your parents.
Yes.
Right.
We came up almost every summer. I have spent part of every year of my life here, part of it. I think 1 year I was only a weekend, but I still was there.
Did you then inherit the farm, the house from your parents? Was it after your parents died that
Yes.
you moved here then?
Well, no, my mother died in '76. My dad didn't die till '84. What actually precipitated our moving here was my oldest brother calling me and saying, "Dad's going to sell the place." And none of us wanted that to happen. We all loved it. And the question why, and he said, well, he's got Lionel wants to retire. Lionel was the person that looked after the place when we
It was
were
Lionel
here.
Tracy.
Lionel Tracy, exactly, who was excellent, wonderful guy. And I said, oh God, I said, tell him I'll move up there and take care of it for him. And so I talked to my dad, and he said, "You're nuts. You don't want to do this." And he said, and I said, "No, I do. I wanted to live there all my life." And so is Nancy. Nancy and I spent our honeymoon here, by the way. And so that's how we moved up here. And then, yes, it became.
Now, what year would that have been? Approximately?
1980.
1980.
Yep.
Can you mentioned that about the honeymoon. Nancy had said that. Well, isn't there a story that Nancy then became a judge at the Cornish fair?
Yes.
While on your honeymoon?
I don't know how Ruth did it, but Ruth ran into Nancy somewhere.
Ruth
Rollins.
Yeah.
And asked her if she'd be willing to be a judge at the Prince and Princess.
And this was during the honeymoon?
Yeah. And I think she did it for, I don't know, 30 years or 25 years, something. She did it for a long, long time, every summer, because we always tried to make sure that our vacation, as a teacher, I didn't have the whole summer off because a lot of times I was doing administrative stuff or I had a summer job. But whenever we could, we tried to be sure we were here for the fair. And when we would show up, Ruth would call, and because she always knew, because Lionel and Martha were here, and Lionel and Martha were part of the town.
So then in 1980 you moved here. Now, you have been very active in the community. You were a selectman.
Yeah.
And you were a selectman when they met on School Street in what is now the.
Yes.
Tell
yes,
us.
I never.
What was it? What was it like? What was that building like working in then?
Well, it's cold in the winter. You wanted to be sure you had a fairly thick rug under your feet in the wintertime because it was drafty. The one-holer was an interesting experience in the town clerk's office. There were certainly lots of old papers there, but it was it was an office. It was a pleasant place to be. Not like the new office is. It was warm and so forth and so on. But I didn't know any better and didn't know any different, so it was fine with me. It was an interesting experience.
Any particular issues that came up while you were selectman?
Oh gosh, all kinds of stuff, but I don't remember any really big ones. Now, somebody watching this may say, "Oh my God, he doesn't even remember," and something they remember. I guess the only one that comes to mind right away was the culvert on the road that goes by George Edson's house, and I can't think of the name of the road. It washed out. And we decided not to replace it, not to close the road.
That was quite an issue, wasn't it?
Yeah, just not to close the road, but just not to replace it. And we didn't have the money in the budget and so forth. And there was a big brouhaha about that. And eventually, it was replaced. But I guess if I remember, it's hard to remember all this stuff. If I remember, there's a law that says you have to keep the road in functioning as a road, and eventually it did.
Yeah.
It did.
Well, that was a contentious issue.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Now you served with Mike Hitzevich.
I did.
Yeah. People have fond memories of Mike. Tell us some Mike Hitzevich stories, or things that you remember about Mike.
He was a good selectman. And
Clark Camp Road, by the way.
Clark Camp Road is right.
I interrupted you, but at
No,
at the
good.
Historical Center, there's a button that says, what I found, Save Clark Camp Road.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, my.
So pardon me for interrupting you.
No,
on that.
no.
But
Actually,
go on with Mike.
He's a very interesting man. I mean, his family history was really something, but something from that time, the Clark Camp Road time. I had, as I said, been a teacher, and I had done some administrative work, so I had some experience with the world, but I had never had any experience as an elected, representative. And we were told that on a Friday night, one of the senators was going to come and talk to us about this, that the folks that wanted the culvert replaced right away were going to have this senator come. And Mike taught me a good lesson. I came in and I was obviously nervous, and he said, "What's the matter?" And I explained. I said, "This guy's coming in here, I don't know, a senator." He said, "Look, just keep your mouth shut and let people talk. Don't say anything." And when the time is right, then we can say something, but just let people talk. And I think it was an excellent lesson, because that really is, that it oftentimes is a key to what a solution might be, or what direction you might go with an issue and a problem, is to listen to what people have to say instead of trying to solve the problem right away, which I have to say that was sort of my way of wanting to do it. So, Mike was one of the most involved people. I remember a couple of us got together and put together a proposal and an application, both of those are the wrong words, for a volunteer award for Mike. And we finally figured out, between his years as a selectman, on the school board, the planning board, and a couple of other things, the fair, something else, he had close to 200 years of volunteer work on behalf of the town. He really, he did a lot. The mayor, as a lot of people called him, and he was good about. Oftentimes you'd be in a meeting doing something, and Mike would get up and say, "I've got to go. I'm haying my, the boys are haying the backfield, and I got to see how they're doing," kind of thing. Yeah. But I loved talking to him about his memories of his time, and one, I got involved in collecting antique tractors a number of years ago, and plows, although I don't have much anymore. Anyway, one of his stories to me was watching an old steam traction engine, which was what was before the gasoline engines, and a plow. And when I say a plow, I say there were 16 bottoms on the plow, 16 different plows. And he said this was in Russia. They fired it up in the morning, and you would watch it disappear. It would keep on going till the middle of the day, and sometimes that's 2 or 3 miles away. The fields apparently are huge, and they'd turn it around and they'd have their lunch, turn around, and come back, and that's how they plowed the fields. And I'm pretty sure he said that was in Russia. I have to be careful. But he was a fascinating guy. He had learned a lot about a lot of things.
Did you also serve with him? Well, he was on the planning board. Did you serve with him on the planning board, or was it just select board?
No. Was he on the planning board?
Was it?
I don't think he was. He got off.
He was on the school board.
Yes, I think he got off the planning board, because as soon as I got on the board of selectmen, I became the selectmen's representative to the planning board. So I did that.
But then you served on the planning board.
I served on the planning
Tell
board
us
the whole
about
time.
your experiences on the planning board.
Let me go back just a second to Mike and planning. Mike and I seem to remember Peter Burling were the ones that had the foresight to write the first planning document for the town of Cornish. I wish Heidi was here. She has such a good memory for these things. And yes, I was on the planning board for a number of years, and I was also on the, as a result of that, on the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Council board. Laird, it's difficult to remember because something comes up and it's maybe an issue for a few weeks or a couple of months or something like that. For instance, the tower down here, I was not involved in that. So there were things there were small things, smaller issues that don't stick in my memory. I guess one that I remember was being approached by somebody to develop some land across from the blacksmith shop bridge, and that was an issue for a while. And we thought at the time, the planning board, if I remember correctly, thought at the time that town really wasn't ready for that kind of development in a place like that. And we were discussing all this, and somebody suggested talking to the Historic Society, which we did, and we found out that the Historic Society had spent some money in refurbishing that bridge at some point, and which made it an historic building, and therefore it couldn't be used for everyday passage kind of thing. But I can't say that I remember. It's not. It was unexciting. It was interesting, especially for me because I'd never had any experience in that area. We wrote the town plan, and rewrote the town plan. Generally speaking, I think the idea was to have the growth in the town be slow. It's probably not the right word, but measured, I think, is a better word. Measured, and I think try to keep the businesses fairly small and so that they wouldn't have too big an impact on the town.
To preserve open space.
Yes. Yes, and to preserve open space. At some point, there was some talk, and not when I was not even when I was in town, about the possibility of a pulp mill going in somewhere around here. Now, whether it was in Cornish or not, I can't recall. But that was the kind of thing that we thought. We wanted the planning board, the town, because that's who really makes that decision. Wanted a rural town. They wanted to retain as much of the rural character of Cornish as they could.
Yeah. As we're talking, I found this so interesting. I forgot to ask you one thing I wanted to ask in relation. I saw a videotape of a meeting that you attended at the Blow-Me-Down Farm, and you mentioned that you had seen Willie Beeman's trains.
Yes.
Now, he would have died, but tell us about that, because I found that very interesting.
I never knew Willie Beeman.
Yeah, but you saw
my parents did.
Yes.
They were friends.
Friends with Beeman.
Yes. And friends and Mrs. Beeman. I knew Mrs. Beeman. I'm sure she might not have remembered me, but I certainly went to her house enough, and she would come here occasionally. And they had two children, Charlie and Mary. And I knew them very well, we saw a lot of them. They were good friends of my parents. And yes, there was a whole building there, and I swear it's still there, with a huge train layout in it on tables.
This is Willie Beeman's.
I think they were Willie Beeman's.
Yeah,
yes, they were. I think they were Charlie's fathers. Yeah, and Charlie played with them. And we were allowed to look in the window. That's as close as we got. I actually I don't believe I ever saw them run. Maybe I did, but I don't remember. It was quite a layout. That was a lovely place down there. Well, it still is.
Yes.
But when it was their home, it was different.
You remember it? Yeah.
I do. I remember. The problem is I remember what wasn't there now that I walk around, because Lewis, I think it was, changed an awful lot on the inside of the house, particularly in the kitchen in that area. So it was different after that.
I wanted to. I think this might be a good point to. You have been so active in the community, and so has Nancy.
Yes.
And from the Historical Society point of view, you have both been very helpful there. Elmer Wood Bartlett slides you obtained,
Yeah.
and you made digital copies and provided us with photographs. So both of you have been in that. And Nancy, I know of Nancy being active in Aging in Place,
Yeah.
Neighbor to Neighbor, General Assistance, and now her big project, I think, is this Willing Hands.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
What little I know about it, it's on
sure.
Wednesday afternoons.
Yeah.
Willing Hands, I think, is a group in the Upper Valley that goes around and collects food, and I don't know whether where it comes from. I think it comes from stores and restaurants and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And they go around to various towns and drop this off for people who are interested in having fresh food and could use some help getting it. And they have it. They're doing it now at the fire station in the flat. And Wednesday afternoon, she's out there. The Willing Hands comes. They drop off the the stuff, and it gets moved into the building, and people come and take what they can use. And she says that they're getting a pretty good. Lots of
Yeah.
people are coming.
No,
Lots
it's
of
very
people are
admirable.
showing
What
up.
she and Pam Metis
Yes,
have worked on
yes,
that.
yeah,
Very
Pam
admirable
Metis,
what she's
right,
done,
yeah.
for people in need to come.
Well, she's very interested in the concept of aging in place.
Yes.
She was very close to her mother when her mother got to the point where she couldn't stay home anymore, and I think it could stay in her home anymore, and that affected Nancy, I think. And she was also looking for something to do. She spent years working in the school, starting with the kindergarten, and then she volunteered for all kinds of things in the school. She did the phone book, she did the calendar. Years ago, there was a calendar with everybody's
Say a little bit about the
birthday.
phone book, because that everyone in Cornish thinks that's very important.
Yeah, well, she's done that for years and passed it off to our daughter-in-law, who fortunately is willing to, and happy to do those kinds of things. Yeah, it was a lot of work. And she's worked with Barbara. You'd think I could remember,
Is
but I can't.
Henry Holmeyer's wife?
No, I don't think.
Barbara Rawson? No.
No, Barbara's not married at the moment. Maybe it'll come to me.
Sure.
She does the layout. She does the computer work, Barbara, and it takes a lot of time and checking, and the funny thing is they check and check and check, and she gives the phone numbers to people to check and lists other people to check and gets them back and rechecks them, and inevitably the book comes out and she gets 2 or 3 calls. You got my number wrong. Or, you left my number out, or something
Sure,
like that.
sure.
No matter what,
Yeah.
it always ends up that way.
Well, I think we're pretty close now to the end. I always like to conclude by asking people to compare Cornish. We talked about Windsor past and present. Compare Cornish past and present, the changes you've seen.
Well, I tell people I don't think Cornish has changed a lot. Clearly, it has. There are more houses in Cornish, and on smaller lots, but it really hasn't changed that much. I'd have to say it's certainly pretty much the same as it was in 1980 when we moved up here. And while I knew Cornish, and I knew a lot of people in Cornish before that, I didn't spend enough time here during the whole year, I think, to have a sense for the town. I know that as far as the school is concerned, the population is amazingly diminished in this day and age. Yet I think that the population of the town is pretty much the same as it has been right along.
Interesting talking to other people when I ask that question, they frequently say the big change are the roads. Now, thinking about it, you were not here in the winter and probably in the mud season, but other people would say the improvement on the road structure, is a tremendous difference.
Yes, I guess that's probably true.
Yeah.
You're right. I wasn't here in the wintertime. I mean, I have been for 20 years.
Yes, yeah. But the roads are much better.
The roads are a lot better.
Sure.
Yeah, they really are.
Okay, well, listen, is there anything final that you would like to add, perhaps that we didn't ask you about? Or
No, I can't think of anything except I love this town, and I've loved living here. I mean, I do love living here.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Very informative.
Oh, you're
Thank you
welcome,
very
I'm
much.
sure.
And Billy, as we like to say, we always say at the end of every
He's very
interview,
good.
Billy, this is a take.